Hey folks, this is Kelani. We'll be seeing a whole bunch of changes in patch 8.2, so much so that the game is probably going to feel significantly different when you add in all the content that the next patch will bring along with it. There's a new take on trinkets, with one of the most customizable trinkets we've ever seen being introduced into the new Mechagon zone. A brand new affix will replace reaping in Season 3 of Battle for Azeroth, and we have a little more information on that front. The PvP essence has been changed again, and then there's also some unique transmog opportunities in the next raid. Quite a bit to talk about, so let's jump right in. So one of the big pieces of news we have to talk about is the new Beguiling affix. The only thing we had to go on until now was a single string of text. Azshara's emissaries can be found throughout the dungeon. Not all too helpful. We had a few guesses about what that could mean, and it turns out one of them was right. Throughout each dungeon you will find handmaidens of Azshara in certain packs of monsters. There's 3 varieties that we know of right now, but more might be added in before this goes live. Each handmaiden uses a different school of magic to make things more difficult for us. There's one which uses shadow magic, the void-touched emissary, one which uses frost magic, the emissary of the tides, and one which uses arcane magic, the enchanted emissary. It's safe to say that these new NPCs will probably cause a whole bunch of issues with certain pulls, but apparently the idea is for you to have to try and mix things up with dungeon pass and pulls. Maybe we'll have to pull a pack we usually skip because there's an emissary present, or maybe we'll have to avoid certain pulls because of the new emissaries. This does mean that we'll have a bit more trash to work through no matter what, but with reaping gone, we won't have to watch the trash percentage anymore and watch for those 20, 40, 60, 80 markers and plan pulls around that, so hopefully that changes up things a bit as well. This might also create less of a focus on AoE damage because you won't be grouping up the emissaries like you do with reaping ghosts, and if killing emissaries becomes super important, then single target DPS might just become as important as the AoE damage. I hope this shakes things up a bit, because seeing double rogue in all of the MDI teams is a little boring to say the least. The emissaries will probably have some generic attacks which will follow their school of magic, maybe some frostbolt volleys and whatnot, but the main ability of this new affix seems to be tied to some new buffs. Wowhead has been doing quite a bit of digging on this one and has found some interesting spells, abilities and buffs. This seems to be made up of different stages. They all seem to have a decree and a buff. The Arcane Emissary's decree is Queen's Decree Blowback. This grants nearby allies of the emissary a buff which reflects back 200% of the damage they take. So if this emissary is present, you'll most likely have to kill it first, because if you hit any of the other mobs around it, you'll start nuking yourself into oblivion. There's also a buff tied to this ability called Enchanted, which says attacks will knock the enchanted emissary back, so maybe we can knock the emissary all the way away from the trash mobs to get rid of that damage reflect aura so we can kill the trash as usual. That's probably one strategy to take down these new mobs, but this whole affix might have a different approach. What if killing these emissaries provides you with a unique buff? Something else was dug up which points towards exactly that. The arcane one is the least accurate or confirmed buff right now. It's a bit wishy-washy, but it might be an arcane explosion AoE buff that gives you a huge boost to your clearing potential because you're just blasting off arcane explosions constantly. That's after you kill the emissary. If that's the case, it might well be worth single target nuking the emissary down and then making the most out of that arcane explosion buff by pulling a bunch more trash while the effect lasts. We'll have to wait and see to figure out how this entire thing is supposed to work when we can actually test it, but the dev team might very well be considering a risk-reward type of gameplay, where you can skip the emissaries if you really want to, but if you decide to take the extra time to knock out one or two, you'll be rewarded for your efforts with some powerful buffs. Now the Shadow Emissary and the Frost Emissary that were dug up seem to have some more credibility to their abilities. These Shadow Emissaries will use Queen's Decree Hide. This deals shadow damage equal to 50% of max health to anyone within line of sight of the caster with an 8-second cast time. So that gives you plenty of time to try find somewhere to hide, probably why it's called Queen's Decree Hide, but very punishing if you get caught out in the open. The buff you might get for killing these emissaries is the Gift from Below. This reduces your max health by 5% for 3 minutes, but increases your damage by 5% for the same duration. This effect can also stack, so if you can kill another Shadow Emissary before this expires, you could keep a stacking damage increase buff throughout your entire run. That might make up for the lost time spent on the emissary and maybe make killing emissaries the fastest way to complete your dungeon. The Frost Emissary will be using Queen's Decree Unstoppable. This makes anything around the emissary immune to crowd control. That's going to be a major problem on some pulls of certain dungeons for sure. Not being able to sap, sheep, stun, or even interrupt mobs is going to be really difficult, but the buff you get for knocking out a Frost Emissary regens 15% of your max health every second for 5 seconds. Maybe not quite as powerful as a stacking damage increase, but that's one heck of a healing boost to get you back in the game. All you have to do is kill the emissary first. So this affix could change how we approach Mythic Plus dungeons quite considerably. I'm super excited to see how it all pans out when it finally becomes available for testing, which, with the patch estimated to be about a month away, give or take, it should be pretty soon. I would expect this to be available on the PTR within the coming weeks, maybe even this coming week. I also mentioned a super special trinket coming from the Mechagon zone, and I'm kind of surprised that some people I've been talking to didn't know what this trinket was and why it was such a big deal. The pocket-sized computation device comes from an early quest in the Mechagon zone. This is part of why it's so special, because it's not really locked behind anything. Everyone will have this trinket and have easy access to this trinket, providing you spend enough time to work through the Mechagon introduction quests, which only takes maybe 10 or 15 minutes, so there's no real excuse not to get your hands on this. Now you may be asking, well, if everyone gets one, how can it be special at all? Because the trinket itself doesn't actually do anything. It's completely blank. It's an empty husk. To get any use out of this trinket, you'll have to collect punch cards. They're kind of like gems, like old gems. There's a slot in the trinket for 3 different punch cards: a yellow card, a blue card, and a red card. Each card adds something new to the trinket. Yellow cards add passive stats, red cards add special trinket effects, and blue cards provide a small quality of life bonus. You can chop and change, mix and match, pick and mix these punch cards however you want. You can build your very own specifically tailored trinket. If you want haste and crit with a haste proc and a neural silencer addition, you can do that, providing you collect the necessary cards. So instead of collecting the trinket, you're collecting parts to customize the trinket. I think that's a really interesting way to go about this. It gives us something to actively work towards, which will be different depending on your class or even your spec and what stats you want, what passive or active effects you're interested in, and then the blue card stuff is all personal preference. So we'll all be hunting for punch cards, but we might be hunting for different ones. If you play different characters, that would mean you could have different goals relating to this trinket for each of your characters that you play. And then we also have the choice of how to piece this trinket together. If you'd rather have Verse and Mastery, go for it. If you want the active effect instead of a passive, all you have to do is get the correct card and slot it in. This trinket is going to be powerful for anyone and everyone, especially if you're a little behind in terms of item level and gear, because we get to choose just how useful it is for our characters. If you are ever curious about why there is not a benthic trinket available down in Nazjatar, this is probably the reason why. This trinket is going to act as both a catch-up and a progression mechanic for everybody involved in the Mechagon zone. We also haven't really had anything like this in a long time, not since the typical gem slots were removed and turned into another RNG reward. I am super interested to see how this trinket can keep up with some other trinkets on offer in patch 8.2, mainly from the new raid, because I think it has a lot of potential as an idea, and it would be a shame to flush it all down the toilet because it gets restricted by item level or something similar. So what about the punch cards? How can we get our hands on some of those? Well, they come from a variety of activities tied to the Mechagon zone, so you can find a few from rares, I believe. Some are purchasable from the Rustbolt Rebellion faction Quartermaster, that's the new reputation we'll be farming, at different levels of rep, and a lot of them come from the Mechagon Mega Dungeon. Every single boss drops a different yellow punch card. The 4th boss and the last boss drop a few red cards, which I'm sure everyone will be after, and those same bosses also drop a blue card each. It seems like the blue cards are further and far between. They're the rarest ones, but they're also the least impactful ones when all is said and done, so maybe that's a good way to balance it. If you hop onto the PTR, you can have a look at the different punch cards available from the dungeon fairly easily. Just check the loot table of each boss to see what's on offer. There are a lot of cool things coming with the new Mechagon zone. This Build-A-Bear Trinket is just one of them. I also mentioned that the PvP essence that was very recently introduced was changed. Most notably, the two powerful raid-wide buffs provided to Balance and Feral Druids were removed and changed to something a little less powerful, like the Thorns PvP talent. It's safe to say that this essence will have very little potential in raids or dungeons going forward, except in really niche situations, which is apparently the point. This essence wasn't designed to give PvE players more abilities or tools to play around with, or to potentially break or exploit a few bosses with crazy PvP talents, but it was to give PvP players a chance to change things up and take a free talent by using this essence. I don't have a problem with that at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if no one ended up taking this essence because it takes up the only major slot we have in the system. A lot of these essences are bat-whiz brokenly overpowered, especially the major powers. Giving up any of those abilities for one of the lackluster PvP talents, because at this point I don't think any powerful PvP talents have been chosen for the PvP essence at all, is just not going to happen. I would love to hear some opinions from avid PvPers on the new essence system and whether or not they think the Conflict and Strife essence specifically is an actual contender for the major slot, because I really don't see it happening. I do think it is a shame, giving us access to more abilities or talents that weren't designed for use in PvE environments could have been a whole lot of fun, but would probably have been a nightmare to try and balance it all. Oh well, back to the 100% crit chance essence for me then. And then last but no means least, the new Eternal Palace raid will have some gear with very special appearances. I think it's just the one right now actually, but you never know how many they could add before the raid goes live. But here we have the Pauldrons of Zakul. These are plate only right now, and we assume they will drop from the boss who they're named after, Zakul the Harbinger of Ny'alotha. Such an interesting title for this chap too. We haven't heard anything concrete about Ny'alotha in a while, just old god whispers here and there. And who would ever trust old god whispers? But this chap being the harbinger of the sleeping city, we might very well see Ny'alotha sometime soon. But back to the transmog. This is the only old god themed piece of gear in the raid right now, from what I understand. The rest of the stuff is themed after the Naga. So this is going to be a special drop one way or another, and it wouldn't be the first time we've seen something like this. The tusks of Manaroth are still being farmed by plate wearers because of how special they are, and items like Lei Shen's crown, Archimonde's helmet, and even Gul'dan's shoulders have been added into the game as unique transmog items. These old god themed plate shoulders look pretty awesome, and you're going to be super lucky if you get your hands on them. I just hope you still have the gift of N'Zoth. The eyes will match beautifully, I'm sure. And that's all I have to talk about in this video. What do you think of the new Mythic plus Affix and the emissaries providing you with buffs if you decide to take them down? What about the new build your own Mechagon Trinket? Does it make you miss the old gem sockets that we used to have? I know that's what I always think of when I look at the Trinket. Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to join these lovely guys and gals, you can find a link in the description below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.